Hi, everyone. This is Zoe, the curator and co-host of the Docs with Disabilities minicast Research and Resource Rounds. To cap off Black History Month, we are sharing with you 2 episodes from Research and Resource Rounds that discuss articles whose authors are rising Black scholars. The first show, Research and Resource Rounds Episode 5, covers the 2022 article Racialized Disablement and the Need for Conceptual Analysis of Racial Health Disparities, written by Dr. Desiree Valentine. Valentine is an assistant professor of philosophy at Marquette University who specializes in critical philosophy of race, feminist philosophy, queer theory, and disability bioethics. The second show, Research and Resource Rounds Episode 15, outlines a research project and 2023 article authored by Dr. Justin Bullock and his collaborators titled Yourself in All Your Forms, a Grounded Theory Exploration of Identity Safety in Medical Students. Bullock is a Nephrology Fellow at the University of Washington and, newly, the co-chair of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative. These shows are 2 of our favorites, both reflecting crucial developments in thinking, research, and mentorship to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in healthcare.
Hello, and welcome to the Research and Resource Rounds podcast, an offshoot of our Docs with Disabilities podcast.
Every month, we will bring you 2 episodes of our new minicast. Each minicast reviews a research article or commentary about disability in medical education.
We bring you, the listener, an easily digestible way to become familiar with this growing body of literature. Research outcomes and calls to action within the literature are then paired with parallel resources for improving the inclusion of healthcare learners, trainees, and professionals with disabilities. We also explore publications that address the status of, need for, and benefits of disability representation among the medical education curricula.
In the process, we hope that you, our listeners, learn more about the research and the resources in this area.
And find some new ways to conceptualize disability and why it belongs in medicine.
I'm Lisa Meeks.
I'm Peter Poulos.
I'm Zoe Martin Lockhart, the curator and co-host of Research and Resource Rounds, and we are thrilled to bring you this important and impactful information. Today on Research and Resource Rounds, we discuss the paper Racialized Disablement and the Need for Conceptual Analysis of Racial Health Disparities in the journal Bioethics as part of our collection Disability and the Health Sciences, Key Arguments and Issues at Stake, Language and History. Please note that this podcast discusses instances of racist medical ideas and violence. This article by Desiree Valentine was published this year, 2022. Racialized Disablement breaks down how and why race and disability, racism, and ableism are inseparable. In this article, Valentine explains that across history, medical practices, healthcare, and other sociopolitical contexts, the concepts of disability and race are inextricably linked and, in fact, co-constructing, as are their counterparts, ableism and racism. Dr. Valentine proposes a lens of racialized disablement, a conceptual tool for highlighting how racism and ableism are locked in a constant dynamic interchange where the manifestations and significations of one shape the other, and vice versa. The paradigm of racialized disablement emphasizes process. Valentine points out that neither the racialization of people nor their classification as disabled are one-time events. They are processes that occur within social, political, historical contexts and in relation to each other. Valentine further illustrates how racialized disablement adds nuance to analyses of health disparities and suggests pedagogical interventions in health sciences education. Her work is focused on the US system, as is this podcast, which highlights some key components of her piece. This article builds on basic principles of intersectionality, a lens and conceptual framework developed by Kimberly Crenshaw and the Combahee River Collective that focuses attention on how facets of experience and identity that are often treated as discrete, such as gender, race, sexuality, disability, and more, are in fact experienced all at once. Each dimension of an identity, and any discrimination or benefit that comes with it, affects how every other dimension is seen or experienced. Valentine develops the lens of racialized disablement as a paradigm that contextualizes discrimination as intertwined, dynamic processes. Most models of disability emphasize that disability and being disabled is not a one-time either-or thing. Whether or not someone is disabled can depend on context and narratives. The way a society views and talks about a particular person or group can also position them as less able, disabled, or even superhuman, all deviations from the normal, acceptable spectrum of ability that gets normalized in a society. Valentine cites scholar Ellen Samuel's work to offer an example displaying the interplay of discriminatory racialization and disableization, or disablement. Racialized groups, especially Black people within the US context, have frequently been given pathologizing diagnoses and labels, or described with language associated with incapacity and disability. A stark example is drapetomania. Enslaved Black people in the US who desired or sought to escape enslavement were diagnosed with a mental health condition, drapetomania. The lens of racialized disablement helps us see how the psychological pathologization of enslaved Black people in the US, a type of disablement, was a method of racialized control and subjugation. Thus, someone's racial category placed them into a group that could undergo disablement via this pathologization. In the other direction, the medicalized diagnosis of drapetomania was designed to be applied to a group defined by its racialized categorization, Black enslaved people. The effects of legal, social, and medical dehumanization and discrimination trickle down and today affect the health and disability status of Black and Indigenous people and many other groups of people racialized as non-white. Moreover, biases rooted in long-standing dehumanizing medical narratives linger. We will return to that in a moment. So, why is this lens of racialized disablement important, and what does it contribute to the work of healthcare professionals? 1. First, this lens provides a methodology for examining racial health disparities that does not implicitly blame marginalized populations for the health issues they experience. It offers a wider lens. In conjunction, it is a tool for taking history into account when analyzing public health in the present, which helps avoid circular reasoning. Saying, well, someone from a marginalized racial group is more likely to have X health condition, say hypertension, because they belong to that group, is circular and can carry implications of inevitability and even blame. Valentine points out that even if we understand racialization, racism, and thus race as processes, it is still easy to think about patterns of health disparities as semi-inherent qualities associated with particular groups. That is, to essentialize the disparities as just one other characteristic of a group. But that angle fails to focus on the historical and present events and systems that create the stark discrepancies in health between differently racialized groups. Work on racial health disparities operates at the level of population or large group differences, and Valentine's lens effectively engages work at this altitude. It also is a tool for considering how population-level racial inequalities and health disparities manifest in individual instances. 2. Second, the racialized disablement lens is a tool for us to avoid oversimplifying issues of racism, ableism, and health more broadly. The lens makes transparent how forms of racial and disability classification and discrimination are inseparable. Their inseparability is otherwise occluded and normalized. Valentine explains that, quote, Too often, racial health disparities, as an organizing moniker, eschews the role of ableism as it interacts with racism to produce health inequalities. Close quote. Two examples offered by Valentine are also useful pedagogically, illustrating how we can more accurately identify the underpinnings of health disparities today by tracing the thread of historical manifestations of racialized disablement through to the present day. I urge you to read her article in full. One example, in the 1800s and beyond, many white people believed that pain tolerance was higher among Black people. This fed into a larger narrative that cast enslaved people as being hyper-able and uniquely physically hardy, a narrative that both dehumanized them and functioned to justify their continued enslavement and abuse. As a result, J. Marion Sims justified conducting torturous and non-consensual gynecological surgical experiments on Black enslaved women without anesthetic. The myth of Black patients having greater pain tolerance endures. Multiple recent studies show that Black patients' and women patients' pain is, perhaps unconsciously, taken as less serious and undertreated by healthcare practitioners. Biases in the provision of medical care today negatively impact the health of Black populations and other people of color. Racial bias is itself disabling, a vector of disablement to Black and other populations of color. Third, the racialized disablement lens provides a heuristic and pedagogical tool, both Valentine's words, for healthcare practitioners to learn and think about racial health disparities with more perceptiveness, and to think about their place in this health landscape of such vast health disparities, economic inequality, and discrimination across social and built environments. For instance, think about food deserts, differential resourcing of schools, or documented racism in hiring practices. We like to wrap up each episode by highlighting some resources. We recommend the book Black and Blue: The Origins and Consequences of Medical Racism by John Hoberman, and the podcast series on anti-racism in medicine by the Clinical Problem Solvers. Some additional articles are cited in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Today on Research and Resource Rounds, we're discussing Yourself in All Forms, a grounded theory exploration of identity safety in medical students, published in 2023 in Medical Education by authors Justin Bullock, Javid Sukhera, Amira Del Pino Jones, Timothy Deister, Jonathan Ilgen, Ty Lochspieser, Pim Tennyson, and Karen Hauer. Bullock and his colleagues develop a theory of identity safety through careful analysis of 16 in-depth interviews with third and fourth year medical students with a diverse range of identities and experiences. The team was intentional in cultivating a diverse participant group in order to understand factors that contribute to medical students' sense of identity safety in medical environments. This article focuses on students' experiences of clinical rotations, also known as clerkships, for which medical students move through different medical specialties, spending periods of several weeks immersed in each, while supervised by attending physicians from each given specialty. Rotations are demanding, and trainees' experiences often vary between specialties, hospitals, and by the approaches taken by the individual supervisors students work with. Investigating identity safety in this context meant asking what factors facilitated a sense of security and support among trainees, such that they felt safer to bring their full selves to their rotations and to the hospital environment. While this article does not focus specifically on disability identities and experiences, its research question, methods, and findings bear directly on issues of inclusion and safety for medical trainees with identities or experiences that are minoritized and discriminated against, both in our broader sociopolitical milieu and in medicine. Therefore, we consider this work a critical contribution to the question of disability inclusion in education. When I say minoritized identities, I am referring to identities and/or characteristics that are commonly subject to bias and stigmatization and/or are often the target of legal and political limitations or repression. Hence, these groups are minoritized by the array of sociopolitical structures that can subjugate their full safety and participation in society. While Bullock and his co-authors created a theory of identity safety, its converse, identity threat, is far more studied. Bullock et al. Define identity threat as any form of internal, interpersonal, or structural hostility towards one's identities. Identity threat is a barrier in pedagogical environments, harming learners' well-being, sense of safety, and ability to learn. Bullock et al. Remind us of the complexity of identity and its development. Identity is multifaceted. We all hold a plurality of identities across many dimensions of experience and social life, all of which will always exist relationally with each other within the matrix of any person's subjectivity. This article observes that although all medical trainees develop a professional identity during their education, the normative, accepted, and archetypal role of medical professional will not feel the same to everyone. They explain that some students may feel required to give up certain identities in order to feel belonging in medicine. Similarly, many disabled healthcare professionals face questions over their competency, professionalism, and belonging in the field. There is no one definition of identity safety. Emphasizing that the construct doesn't receive adequate focus and research, Bullock et al. Offer several possibilities from the existing literature. First, identity safety can be understood as the absence of identity threat. A second definition, from work focusing on LGBTQIA+ youth, frames it in terms of freedom to be oneself. The third, pedagogically oriented definition finds that, quote, identity-safe elementary classrooms leverage diversity, are learner-centered, foster classroom relationships, and create caring environment, close quote. To develop a more robust theory of identity safety tailored to medical education, Bullock and his co-authors conducted 16 interviews with third and fourth year medical students from 3 medical schools. Their methods and analysis drew on constructivist grounded theory and on several branches of critical theory, critical pedagogies, critical race theory, and feminist theory. Bullock and his colleagues provide a detailed account of their robust methodology, a section of their article that is really worth checking out in full. The team involved participants in their research process at 2 stages, providing interviewees a chance to review, respond to, and offer feedback on a draft of their results section. The authors also reflect that the diversity of their team was an asset that they drew on throughout their work, as the heterogeneity of their distinct identities and self-presentations played an important role in their research process. Bullock et al. Draw on their interview analysis to identify specific factors that create or contribute to identity threat, threat mitigation, and identity safety. They discuss 3 main sources of identity threat. 1, unwelcoming environments. Bullock et al. Describe unwelcoming environments as those that lacked diversity of identities and allyship, while tokenizing specific identities of some participants. Some interviewees described the challenges of not seeing medical role models who shared their identities or experiences. 2, feeling pressure to change one's behavior to fit in. Interviewees reported feeling compelled to alter their self-presentations, from appearance to speaking style, to protect themselves from judgment, uncomfortable encounters, or other discrimination in their educational milieus. Changing self-presentation is a taxing process that increases the emotional and cognitive load students handle alongside regular clerkship stressors. In their future practice of medicine, interviewees aspired to find or create environments in which they did not need to change themselves. 3. Broader sociopolitical threats and instances lacking identity safety. Larger societal waves of hate and discrimination contributed to this third type of identity threat. Some interviewees worried for their physical safety while at the hospital after rises in violence targeted against Black and Asian people. Bullock et al. Describe two forms of threat mitigation. Safeguarding describes behaviors taken by the minoritized interviewees themselves, while allyship refers to actions from others. Both safeguarding and allyship involved efforts to lessen the repercussions of an incident on the affected individual or individuals. Participants safeguarded through acts like displaying pins or other signs of their identities, pre-arranging clerkship accommodations, and finding mentors with concordant identities. Allyship actions included peers or mentors proactively consulting interviewees about the possibility of a future identity threat and how to effectively support them. Allyship can include intervention during an incident, creating an exit route from encounters, for example, with a patient, and opening a space to debrief later. Bullock et al. Note that acts of allyship do not erase the negative and draining nature of microaggressions and identity threats, but that effective allyship can lessen the effect of such incidents. Most importantly, it is key that those acting as allies ask about ways to best support a trainee. The article's Table 2 on page 5 offers specific examples of identity threat and corresponding mitigation shared by interviewees. Bullock and his colleagues enumerate 3 factors contributing to identity safety that emerged from their analysis: agency to serve, upholding personhood, and a sense of belonging. 1. Agency to serve. Bullock et al. Found that medical students cultivated identity safety by drawing on and sometimes disclosing their own identities in healthcare settings, including with patients. The resulting trust facilitated better communication, thus improving the meeting of patients' needs and their safety. Some students' choice of future specialty was informed by experiencing these moments of rapport and improved care. In the context of disabled trainees and healthcare professionals, drawing on one's experiential knowledge of disability to foresee and address potential barriers that a patient may face in navigating healthcare is an example of agency to serve. This may or may not involve direct disability disclosure to patients, peers, or supervisors. My example here draws on Bullock et al.'s descriptions and the focus of our 2 most recent mini-casts, episodes 13 and 14, which illustrate that experiential knowledge of disability is an asset which healthcare professionals and trainees with disabilities bring to their practice. This is one example of leveraging one's identity in patient care. 2. Upholding personhood. This second component of identity safety captures environments where students felt seen and valued as individuals by supervisors. In short, supervisors indicated an interest in getting to know and in supporting their trainees as entire individuals. Interviewee quotes cited by Bullock et al. Suggest that in this endeavor by supervisors, an orientation of curiosity, rather than judgment, is also key. Often, supervisors demonstrated interest and curiosity through small but significant social gestures and activities, such as casually conversing over a meal or taking trainees to coffee. Students identified the clear recognition, interest in, and engagement with students as upholding their personhood and leading to peer connections that did the same. 3. Belonging. Medical student interviewees described a sense of belonging when they shared a minoritized identity or identities with others, particularly with supervisors such as residents or attending physicians. The presence of those with concordant identities, that is, similar to, or the same identities, created a sense of belonging, empowerment, and freedom. Trainees described feeling less need to monitor their self-presentation and a sense of actually having relatable role models. Table 3 on page 7 provides a straightforward summary of the team's identity safety findings with definitions of each contributing factor and several corresponding examples supplied directly by interviewee quotations. Learning outcomes and well-being can be buoyed and buttressed when attention and resources are dedicated to creating an environment that values the many distinct and diverse facets of each individual. To value an individual means to dedicate resources and concrete effort to supporting them. Bullock et al. Introduced the framework of a culturally sustaining pedagogy, CSP, for advancing identity safety. While encouraging practices that cultivate safety, Bullock et al. Urge educators to be mindful of avoiding tokenizing a student as their identities and experiences. Bullock et al. Highlight and promote additive, anti-deficit orientations in pedagogy, methodology, and educational models. Indeed, their project focused on developing a theory of identity safety about which limited work exists, rather than identity threat, a construct that's received far more scholarly attention in research funding and publications. Culturally sustaining pedagogy is, Bullock et al. Write, quote, an anti-deficit framework that actively nurtures and encourages unique ways of being and discourages the development of monocultural learners. As a critical pedagogy, CSP recognizes that learners and mentors exist in a bidirectional learning relationship, close quote. It is difficult to capture the compact clarity, nuance, and intricate detail of this article in a short minicast. I strongly recommend you take the time to read these authors' work yourself. The article is open access and available online. The link will be in the episode transcript. At the end of each episode, we like to recommend additional articles and resources. First, we recommend a recent recorded presentation by Dr. Neera Jain titled The Capability Imperative, Revealing Ableism in Medical Education. In it, Dr. Jain explores the often complex relationship between disability, medical, and other identities. Her talk is part of the Docs with Disabilities Dream Research Rounds series and can be found on the Docs with Disabilities website and YouTube channel. A link will be in the episode transcript. Second, check out the article Cultural Barriers to Help Seeking in Medical Education by Irene Sturgiopoulos, Ligia Fragoso, and Lisa Meeks. This piece was published in 2021 in JAMA Internal Medicine. Thank you for listening.